You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Today, I'm going to be talking about the great talent escape. Did you know you're probably one LinkedIn message away from some of your best team members leaving your business? And if you're a small business owner, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hey, everybody, this is Doug Thorpe, and we're taking a little bit of a detour on Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I don't have a guest sitting in the other seat today. I've been getting some fan mail and some requests by folks to say, Doug, I love the nuggets you sprinkle in on the shows you've done with your guests. The guests have been great, but I think I just want to hear more of what you've got to offer. So here you go. That's what we're going to do. I'm nothing if not responsive to what my audience asks for. So I'm happy to pitch in and help. And I think probably the number one pain point that most business leaders are facing in the modern world is the exodus of talent. Good people getting quickly tired, change their mind, change their attitude, whatever, and moving on. And on one hand, I'm not surprised by it because what I've observed in most businesses that I deal with is that since the big event in 2020, and that was when the whole world went on COVID lockdown, there has been a measurable, palpable mind shift in the minds of everyone that we might want to work with. And there's a good chance that even you as a business leader did your own reassessment and you kind of changed your attitude about how you think business ought to be. But if you're a business owner in particular, and this is who I'm mainly talking to today, if you've got that privately owned small business going on, even if you're up to 25, 50, 100 million in revenue or greater, you're still facing a talent exodus. There's high competition, mainly because people's mindsets have changed. What they used to tolerate at work isn't going to be tolerated anymore, and they're going to go find greener pastures. But guess what? If you are that small, privately held business, you've got some secret weapons that we ought to talk about, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So let me share a couple of thoughts and observations that I've collected over the years. And, in the last 15 years or so, I've had a chance to work with hundreds of business leaders, a lot of different industries, a lot of different sectors. And some of these things we're talking about don't change. The industry doesn't matter. It is a human event. And from my humble perspective, here's the number one issue I think people have in their heart and mind. More and more people want to go to work at a place where they feel a sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose happens at several different levels. They want to feel inspired by what the company says their purpose may be, and it can be as lofty as you may choose, but it has to be something. It has to be an anchor point. It has to be an attraction. It has to be that magnet that gets people to say, I think I want to be part of that. I think I want to go there. I think I want to do some of that. And as you can imagine, that's bigger than a paycheck. So just to offer somebody a position at a certain pay scale, depending on their skill and ability, really isn't enough anymore. As an owner, you've got to really think about that sense of purpose that you want your company to be about, and you have to figure out how to explain it to the people you want to attract so that you can get the right people on the bus. Now, that sense of purpose also comes up inside every individual's heart. Their hearts and their minds need to be hooked into the work you're doing. And if you don't have both, you're not going to get it. And there's an old phrase that says, harness the power of your mind's attention and your heart's affection. Let's think about what that means a minute. Your mind's attention, that means all the power that a person has in their brain to think, do, and even feel about what they're doing, that needs to be activated. That needs to be turned on, and that needs to be mobilized for your greater good if you want to get the best out of that person. But it's not enough just to stimulate them intellectually, if you will. They have to feel that heart, that sense of belonging, that reason to be there. And that is such a critical step that I think a lot of companies are missing. And the overarching, the main solution for all of this is to think about the culture you want to build in your company. Now, there's a crap ton of content being written about company culture. Everybody's got a lot of ideas on it, but mine is pretty straightforward, follows my common sense approach, and that is culture is simply how we're going to do things. Think about that for a minute. If you, as a business owner, have not successfully identified your vision, not just for the product and service you want to deliver, but the how, how are we going to exist? How are we going to show up? How are we going to represent what we do to our customers? How are we going to deal with vendors and suppliers? How are we going to deal with our neighbors in the community? How are we going to do all of that? And most importantly, how are we going to treat each other? That is such a critical element inside a business because you want to turn off a good employee quickly, throw them into a pool where everybody is sniping at each other, yakking at each other. They don't trust each other. They don't have each other's back. There's a competition. There's backstabbing and all of those drama things that come up that we see memorialized on TikTok videos and Instagram. You as an owner have to do some work to think about the culture you want to build, and you've got to teach that to people. You've got to invite people to join you that have a tendency or a propensity or an attraction to be part of that. If you say everything we have to do has to be wildly extroverted, that's okay. You can make that call, but guess what? You better not be hiring a bunch of introverts to be on your bench. They're not going to fulfill that sense of culture that you want to build. But if you, as an owner, founder, are not doing enough to really talk about the culture you want to have and then live it day by day, as the old saying goes, are you going to walk what you talk? You can put some words together and get some gold letters and paste them on the wall in your lobby or on the side of your trucks. But if you're not showing up delivering that way, you're going to have a problem. In a prior episode on my show, I interviewed the owner of a plumbing company in Colorado, and some of you may remember that. It was quite some time ago. The company was called High Five Plumbing, and their logo was the hand doing the slap, a high five. Well, that was a culture statement. They wanted everything to be worthy of a high five moment. Every job ticket they took, every customer home they went into to do their plumbing work, they aspired or they worked hard, they trained their people, and they encouraged the culture of making it a high five moment. And they treated each other that way. They celebrated little victories, they celebrated successes, they celebrated personal dreams and aspirations, and they did that collectively as a team on a regular basis. And yes, they had quarterly barbecues and cookouts and things like that, but it wasn't just simply a social event. They actually did some work talking about each other's dreams, visions, and aspirations so that people got to know each other. They knew what a high five moment was going to be for their partner in their truck, or the guy in the warehouse, or the lady at the call desk, the call center. They knew that about each other, and they helped contribute to making that happen. So, kudos to that company for the culture they've built and developed. And guess what? They have very little turnover. They do have some, but the the main source of turnover is simply an employee having a substantial life event that just is unavoidable, like moving out of town or something like that. They have very, very little turnover related to, I think I found a better job. It it just seldom happens because it's hard to beat what people have there. There's a scale of opportunity to grow and earn more money over time at that business. There's an attitude, there's a head and heart connection that keeps people engaged. And they have this wild sense of purpose to be the best darn plumbing company in the greater Denver area. And they're well on their way to do just that. It's a great example of how things can work for the owner that is willing to get in and help make that culture work. Now we're going to talk about another secret weapon that you as a business owner may have in your toolkit that you don't think about very often, and that is the ability to create a better level of employee engagement. Now, where does employee engagement come from? It it does start with that head and heart connection, but how do you do that? What does that really mean? What are some practical things you can think about doing to get there? Well, one of the things that I help my clients understand is that it all starts way out on the front end. It starts in your hiring process when you're posting a job and trying to recruit people to come in. The very first connection they have with your company, whether that's a phone screen or a walk in to the lobby kind of moment, they begin creating an impression of what your company might be about. And if there's a lot of chaos in the front office and a job candidate shows up to try to drop off a resume and they see this chaos, they immediately are going to think, oh, what's going on here? I don't think I want to be part of that. But if they can walk in and the place has a certain hum about it where there's a sense of productivity, but there's not a lot of drama, there's not a lot of loud yelling and screaming and noise going on and confusion, that's a first impression. But it carries over to all steps of the process. If you're going to schedule somebody for an interview, keep the interview time. Don't be jerking them around, and certainly don't be ghosting them. Now, let me put an asterisk on that point. I realize I've heard it frequently. Employers are frustrated. They feel like they're not the ones ghosting, but the candidates are ghosting. And my only answer is, guess what? Congratulations. You just found a disqualification. You don't want that person on your team if that's the way they're going to treat you. And remember, going back to the culture statement, how are we going to treat each other? How are we going to do things? Ghosting is obviously not an acceptable behavior. So don't keep chasing them. If they ghost you, drop them, let them go, move on, go find the next one. But another critical step is, even if you get through the interview process and you make an offer to someone, when they show up on the first day, you are going to be making a statement that will live with them for a very long time. Everyone remembers their first day on a new job. And what you have to do as an owner, you have to have your team ready to make that first day a good experience. I have walked into companies and watched new employees sitting in a lobby, sitting in a waiting room, sitting in a shop with nobody paying any attention to them. And it may maybe 30, 45 minutes, an hour before anybody comes up and says, "Oh, hi, you must be Joe, the new guy. Come on, follow me." Well, they've just wasted a bunch of time, and they've sat there, and they're starting to feel very insignificant and very small, and those are all negative things that you don't want setting up the tone and tenor of what you're trying to do there at the business. So the whole process for recruiting, onboarding, and setting up the first couple of days is very, very critical. That person needs to be made to feel like they are going to be a valued member of the team, not just another number, not just another shirt, not just another pair of hands to go out on the truck. You've got to be able to bring them in the right way. And the other part of continuing the opportunity to have employee engagement is clear communication and alignment of expectations. I had a discussion many months ago with another one of my guests on this show, and we talked about a very great concept, and that is businesses and managers and leaders are usually pretty good about talking about expectation. Here's my expectation. You need to show up on time. You need to do this. You need to read my policies and procedures. I want you to learn the computer system, so on and so on. Well, have you ever communicated to a new employee your obligations to them? What does that mean? Have you ever really thought about what you are going to promise in return? If they deliver on your expectation, what are you going to agree are your obligations? Part of this is, if you think about it, is basic contract law. And I don't want to get too deep into that. I want to keep this simple. But in a basic contract, you got two parties coming together. You have a desire, somebody's got expectations, and they talk about obligations, and both sides get to express what that looks like. In a healthy onboarding discussion with an employee, both of those elements need to be talked about. The employer needs to talk about expectation and obligation. The employee should be invited to feedback, feed in, input, make a statement of their own expectation and obligation. Now, at the simplest, most basic level, it's kind of interesting that if you drew a four blocker grid of that, you got employee on one side, employer on the other, and you got expectations at the top and obligations at the bottom. When you start filling those in, there's this natural crisscross. An employee is going to say, my expectation is that I get paid a certain wage, I get a regular, understandable schedule, I get some training, I get an opportunity to be reviewed, I get a chance to get promoted at someday in the future, so on and so on. That's their expectation. But those are easy things to put in the employer obligation box. The employer can agree. Yeah, I'm going to pay you the wage we negotiated. Yes, that's my obligation. I'm going to give you the training that you need to make you successful. That's my obligation. I'm going to show you a path to growth and opportunity here at my company. That's an obligation, so on and so on. See where we're going with this? You crisscross that grid, and the employer is saying, I want you to follow the training. I want you to be on time. I want you to follow my procedures. If I've got safety or security issues, I want you to follow what we've prescribed, and those are my expectations. Those fall into the obligation box on the employee side. They should be saying, I'm willing to follow procedures. I'm willing to take the training. I'm willing to step up to a certain process and procedure if that's what we're doing here. Now, when you do a good job of having that two-way discussion about expectation and obligation, you can begin to create alignment. And alignment is where and how an employee can start to feel right about the opportunity they're stepping into. But if none of that is discussed, if none of that is really articulated well, if they're just thrown behind a piece of machinery or sat at a desk with a computer, and then little drips and drabs of tasks and challenges start coming their way, they're not going to be aligned. They're not going to understand what they need to be doing if they don't know the bigger picture. Even though they might have been sold on some great vision of purpose during the recruiting process, if they don't see that playing out in the execution of their day to day, all of a sudden that's a red flag and they're going to start pulling back. They're going to start going, no, 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 this is not what I signed up for. And pretty soon they're going to be a disenchanted employee and they'll be out the door on you. Now, one other way to maintain engagement is a method and a process that I've used in a lot of different places. I coach it and I recommend it, and I even have a SaaS technology platform that supports it. It's called Big Five Performance. It's a simple framework where employees and managers can have a dialogue. We recommend once a month. The employee makes a list of what they believe were their five accomplishments last month and their five priorities for the new month. Simple bullet list. They give that to the manager. The manager reviews it and has a sit down one on one feedback session with that employee to talk about those items. They can give kudos and accolades and congratulations for the accomplishments. They can talk about the priority assignments. They can fine tune whether or not the employee has accurately described the five priorities that they should be working on for the month. And we now have on our technology platform, we've got about 3,500 employees across five different organizations using the tool. And what we find is you develop this very crystal clear alignment and clarity on functions, tasks, purpose, and procedure. And you get a lot more productivity. You got people that are engaged at a much higher level. The overall performance of the team and ultimately the organization is better. And managers have a much better time of incrementally working on coaching, development work, an employee that maybe is not getting it and needs some extra training or extra support. You identify that early. You don't let it linger and lag to the point that you're going to be missing opportunities. It becomes a great tool for alignment and thus boosting that employee's sense of engagement because the employee is given that opportunity every month to have that little bit of a check-in and say, am I still on course? Am I still tracking in the direction I need to be going so that I can feel that my contribution to this business is what it should be? Now, I've saved the best for last. And that falls under the category of leadership. Too often, I see small businesses where the owner founder is the guy with the big idea. They've got a new product, a new invention, a new service, some great opportunity that they've turned into a business, and that's wonderful. That's what small business is all about. But there's a real quick transfer from idea to execution. And execution requires leadership, not just management, but leadership. And I'm often asked, the question, Doug, what do you think is the difference between leadership and management? And it's a simple phrase I learned a long time ago that leadership is about people, but management is about process. And there is no doubt many people have made careers out of being good managers. And that means, monitoring a process, flipping the right buttons, cracking the right whip, getting things done in a timely way so that the transactional velocity of the business is tracking and customers are getting deliveries, et cetera, et cetera. But inevitably, when that person in that seat of authority has done nothing but be a manager, you do not have the people connection of the organization. You typically see, over time, you see a frequent high level of turnover. There's a churn on the payroll. You get people that are staying maybe 2 years if you're lucky, and then they're going, nah, I've had enough of this, I'm out. In fact, there is a statistic now that over 60% of the workforce never exceeds 2.5 years in a job. That's a systemic data point that is present in the modern world. And if you're a small business owner, I certainly pray to God that you can figure out how to beat that statistic, because 2.5 years in a small business goes really fast. And as you all probably know. And so you don't want to be that owner that's constantly churning that new hire process to try to find new talent, do the retraining, all the downtime it takes to get somebody new and added to your team. You want to try to get that little more longevity, but that really requires a higher level of leadership where you are leaning into the human side of everything you've got going on. And there's a very delicate balance between being a people-centric leader versus the business itself. In the military, we always talked about the conundrum between man and mission. If you had a mission, you had to go conquer that hill over there. You had a certain number of troops in your unit, and those were your resources, and you had to figure out how to deploy them. And there was always the ever-present challenge of putting people in harm's way out on the battlefield and balancing the mission of getting that hill versus the manpower that you've got and not wiping out your force in the process. Same thing is actually true in business, obviously not as dramatic with such a finite outcome, but still a basic conundrum that all business owners have. You can lean a little too hard on the personnel side. You can be a little too forgiving. You can be, over time, you start lowering standards because it's just too hard to get people to do the work you need to have done. And maybe that's an indicator you don't have the right people in the right jobs, and that's an ongoing process to try to determine that. But when you have been able to do a good job of getting your alignment pretty well figured out and you've got the right people, then there's still the human side of leadership that acknowledges their contribution at the individual level, not as a kind of a blank slate, big number, but as an individual, and part of this goes back to the onboarding. When you meet new employees, you get to know who and what they are. You talk to them about what their motivations are, what their aspirations are, and why did you want to join us? Is there something special about what you heard that in your mind is creating an opportunity for you in the long run? You need to know that, and you need to be able to keep track of that, keep up with it. And that's why this, going back to the big five, or having those routine, regular check-ins is so valuable, because guess what? People change their minds over time. What once was a highly motivating idea when they first join you may have changed. Maybe it was a single guy and he was rocking and rolling, and he was just wanting to work so hard and do all these things. But maybe a year in, he meets the love of his life. They decide to get married, and all of a sudden he's talking about family and kids and where he's going to settle down. And that changes the equation. That changes his mindset about what he's wanting to do. And I use that as just one of many examples that might be out there, but those are the kinds of things that a human-centric leader is going to take into account. They're going to think about those issues, and they're going to figure out the way to leverage that for the greater good. And I mean in a good way, not a manipulative way or a tricky, dishonest kind of way, but in a healthy way. So, folks, I hope this has been helpful. I am going to take a detour from our usual show format periodically. I'm going to leapfrog every other episode we're going to be publishing. I'm going to give you this straight time with me. I've got a list of 25 hot topics that are in the marketplace right now. I've done a lot of research. I've bounced it against themes, issues, and ideas my clients are bringing me and that we're talking about, and I've categorized them, I've summarized them, and yes, I've gotten the AI to help me do a little research. And it's pretty compelling data. So stay tuned. This was number one at the top of the list: employee retention and finding ways to beat that great talent exodus. And again, you as a small business owner, you got some secret weapons you need to think about. And if you need help with any of these points or ideas, that's what I'm here for. Reach out to me at dougthorpe.com. That's THORPE.com. I would love to hear from you. I offer a free kind of consultation, no strings attached, no hard sales pitch. Would just love to hear from you and know what you've got going on in your business that is keeping you awake at night. We can find some ideas and ways to get over that bridge for you. For now, I'm going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.